The scientific enterprise is an active seeking out of gaps in our knowledge, seeking out of ignorance, so that we can work to plug that ignorance. But religion teaches us to be satisfied with not really understanding. Every one of these difficult questions that comes up, science says, right, let's roll up our sleeves and work on it. Religion says, oh, God did it.
This upcoming clip is an absolute masterpiece. It's John Lennox making a piercing distinction between blind faith and the Christian faith. And when you pit a world-renowned scientist and atheist against his Oxford University colleague, you're bound to get some really insightful moments like these. Let's get into it.
There are two issues here. Faith is blind, science is evidence-based. I do not agree with the first one, but I very much agree with the second one. Some faith is blind. And blind faith can be very dangerous, especially if it's coupled with a blind obedience to an evil authority. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize, is true whether the blind faith is that of religious or secular people. But not all faith is blind faith, because faith itself carries with it the ideas of belief, trust, commitment, and is therefore only as robust as the evidence for it. Faith in the flying spaghetti monster, much beloved of Richard Dawkins, a delightful idea, is blind because there's no evidence for the flying spaghetti monster. But faith in relativity theory is not blind because there is evidence supporting it. I can't speak authoritatively for other religions, but faith in the Christian sense is not blind. And indeed, I do not know a serious Christian who thinks it is. Indeed, as I read it, blind faith in idols and figments of the human imagination, in other words, delusional gods, is roundly condemned in the Bible. My faith in God and Christ as the Son of God is no delusion. It is rational and evidence-based. Part of the evidence is objective. Some of it comes from science, some comes from history, and some is subjective, coming from experience. Now, of course, we do not speak of proof. You only get proof in the strict sense in my own field of mathematics. But in every other field, including science, we can't speak of proof. We can speak of evidence, of pointers, of being convinced beyond reasonable doubt. I think it's important in this context to emphasize that science is limited, because there seems to me a creeping danger of equating science with rationality. But what is beyond science is not necessarily irrational. Science cannot tell us, for instance, whether a poem, a work of literature, or a work of art or music is good or beautiful. Science can tell us that if you put strychnine into your grandmother's tea, it will kill her. But science cannot tell you whether it's morally right to do so.
Well said.
And the Nobel Prize winner, Sir Peter Medawar, who's quite a hero, I think, for both of us, has pointed out that you can easily see the limits of science because it cannot answer the elementary questions of a child. Who am I? What is the purpose of my existence? Where am I going? Now, Richard has just contrasted science and religion, religion being content with not understanding, whereas science is unraveling the understanding of the universe. And I understand and feel the force of that objection very strongly, because sometimes Christians, I admit, have been guilty of a lazy God of the gaps kind of solution. I can't understand it, therefore God did it. And of course, God disappears as the gaps close. But I'd like to point out that there are two kinds of gap, ladies and gentlemen. There are gaps that science closes, and I call those the bad gaps. But there are also gaps that science opens, and we may come to some of those later. But as for the idea itself, Richard referred to the very important fact that science, modern science as we know it, exploded in the 16th and 17th centuries, and it arose out of a theistic background. And many philosophers of science have studied this and come to the conclusion that's now called Whitehead's thesis, that human beings became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. I think that is profoundly important, because it means, far from religion hindering science, it was the driving force behind the rise of science in the first place.
Good
and
point.
when Isaac Newton, for example, discovered his law of gravity and wrote down the equations of motion, he didn't say, marvelous, I now understand it, I've got a mechanism, therefore I don't need God. In fact, it was the exact opposite. It was because he understood the complexity and sophistication of the mathematical description of the universe that his praise for God was increased. And I would like to suggest, Richard, that somewhere down in this you're making a category mistake, because you're confusing mechanism with agency. We have a mechanism, it does X, Y, and Z, therefore there's no need for an agent. I would suggest that the sophistication of the mechanism, and science rejoices in finding such mechanisms, is evidence for the sheer wonder of the creative genius of God.
I love when John Lennox made that incredible analogy about Dawkins and his faith in his wife. And it really shows that whether or not you believe in God, we all have faith in something. Whether that could be money for the security or trust, or just like the reliance in it. It could be in drugs for escape or relaxation after a hard day. It could be your wife, just like Lennox was saying about Dawkins. It could really be anything. And in the words of Cliff Nechtel, at the end of the day, when you put your head on your pillow, we all have faith in something. We all do. But is that thing, the object of our faith, worthy of our belief? Well, for that, it's important to examine the evidence, as John Lennox was saying throughout this video. So I encourage you to consider a personal God who knows your name, who knows the number of hairs on your head, who knows all of your struggles, and loves you deeper than anyone on this earth combined. I know this can sound super unimaginable, because I was an atheist too 10 months ago, so I completely understand. But listen, the evidence for God, it's not just like a one and done, one thing that's going to do it for you. It's about continually seeking after the possibility for God with an open mind and an earnest heart. The evidence, it builds a case for itself, and it just keeps on building and building and building. The more that you understand and see the very intricate thread that is built for a case for God over time, I mean, at least for me, it built an extremely compelling case to the point that I'm now convinced that there is a God who loves me. And once I finally put my faith in Jesus Christ, I started a relationship with the God of our universe. And I'm telling you, I talk together with God. I walk together with God. While I'm driving in my car, God's right there with me. He picks me up when I'm down. And he gives me great peace. Great, deep peace. And I want you to know that peace too. I want you to have the immense joy, the peace, and the love that comes with the God of our universe. And so I encourage you on your spiritual journey that you seek after truth with an earnest heart and consider God. God bless you. Have a great day.